All right, so let's talk about in-ear monitors. There are two camps of thought here, those who like them and those who don't. Either way, many musicians will be confronted with the prospect of having to use in-ear monitors at some point. For example, a venue that requires the volume threshold be kept under a certain level, like in houses of worship, or as it happens sometimes with me at the music venue I work at, when we've used all our floor monitors and in-ear monitors are the only resources I have left. As a musician and singer, as well as audio engineer, I can speak with absolute understanding from both points of view. In-ear monitors create an almost silent stage, allowing for the front of house engineer ultimate control of the house mix. The engineer is no longer dealing with muddy sound being thrown off the stage from loud floor monitors. He or she can contour a beautiful sounding present mix without overwhelming the room with excessive volume. In a space with hard surfaces, using in-ear monitors will solve about 70% of issues with intelligibility. However, for musicians who have never used in-ear monitors, this can be a daunting process. Believe me, I get it. Learning how to properly use in-ear monitors takes number one, a little education, and number two, practice. For this reason, I would have several practices with in-ear monitors before ever using them live. I would also make sure that each musician has been trained on how to properly use and set their in-ear mixes. So let's dive in. The absolute best and most natural way to use in-ear monitors is to listen in stereo. Why? Because our ears and brains naturally hear audio in stereo. So let's take a quick look at how we'll be setting this up on our mixing console. We'll be creating a stereo pair using two aux outputs per musician, or buses as they are referred to on some consoles. The output channels should be linked together to create the stereo pair. On the TouchMix 30 Pro, this is indicated by the chain link icon. The aux outputs that you see on the left turn into one larger box when the channels are linked. When dialing in a mix for your stereo in-ear monitors, instruments should be panned across the stereo field. Panning helps create delineation between instruments, allowing the musician to easily reference what they need. Here is a graphic representation of what panning might look like in a musician's in-ear mix. In general, instruments that will almost always be panned in the center are your kick drum, snare, and bass. Other instruments that will most likely be panned in the center are the instruments that the lead musician is playing and their vocal mic if they are singing. Other instruments can be panned at varying degrees to the left and the right to create a full and wide mix in your ears. Inputs that can be panned hard left and right would be your drum overhead mics and stereo keyboards. One of the biggest complaints from musicians trying out in-ear monitors is that they feel disconnected from the audience. Most earbuds create a seal in the ear, cutting out a great deal of ambience that the musicians are so accustomed to. But here's the solution. In the upper left and right corners of the graph, you'll see audience mics. These are microphones, usually condenser mics, that have been set up on the left and right side of the stage facing towards the audience. And these can be panned hard left and right. The musicians can add these audience mics to their in-ear mix at whatever volume they might need to feel and hear the presence of the audience. When set up and dialed in properly, stereo in-ear monitors can be one of the most enjoyable experiences a musician will have. I believe one of the reasons so many musicians don't like in-ear monitors is because they were first exposed to mono in-ear mixes. That's a mix coming from one channel instead of two. Here's what happens in a mono in-ear mix. Everything becomes one big wall of sound mixed up the center, with little distinction between instruments. We weren't created to process audio in this manner, which makes mono in-ear monitoring difficult to get used to. However, sometimes there may not be enough outputs available on the console to provide the entire band with stereo in-ear mixes. In these cases, though it's not optimal, a musician may need to learn how to work with a mono mix. And again, this will take practice and getting used to. When referencing a mono in-ear mix, it's best to add only what you absolutely need in order to play well. You don't get to mix a record when you're working with your mono mix. Here's a graphic representation of what working with a mono mix might look like. The faded instruments represent those with less volume. The musician referencing this mix is a guitar player and vocalist. The guitar and vocal are the most forward in the mix. The other vocals are set somewhat under his own vocal, but there's enough so that he can hear their harmonies. The only drum mics he needed were the kick and the hi-hat. And notice that they are set pretty far back in his mix. Adding all the other drum mics would have added too much extra noise that was not contributing to his reference. He has a small amount of other instruments in there with just enough audience mic level that he can hear what's going on in the room. I've noticed that when I've had to work with a mono in-ear mix, adding too much volume from the condenser mics like drum overheads, hi-hat mic, and audience mics tend to take away from the clarity of my in-ear mix. For that reason, I will use condenser mics sparingly in my mono in-ear mix. A common practice among many musicians using in-ear monitors, especially those referencing a mono mix, is to leave one earbud in and the other out. They do this so that they can hear the ambient noise around them. But folks, this is an unhealthy practice and contributes to hearing loss over time. Musicians who do this will tend to run their volume in that one ear 6 to 10 dB louder than if both earbuds were being used. Remember that a 10 dB increase in sound intensity means doubling the perceived loudness. To give yourself an idea of just how loud your earbud volume is, stick the other earbud back in for a minute while the band is playing. This will be a good reality check. There have been many studies done on this topic, and I would encourage you to check them out. Well, I hope this information has been helpful. I'm Golden Preciado, and until next time.